everybody, this is Corey with Natural Born Tillers. We're at the CDC Gardens, and today we're going to be talking about insect pests. This is part of our 12-part series where we detail different organic techniques and sustainable techniques in gardens in Georgia. So every month we're going to detail something that's happening in the garden. So it's June, and we're talking about everybody's favorite, the tomato. The tomato goes back over 7,000 years, at least in its domesticated form. We know that it was first grown by Native Americans in the Central American and South American areas about 7,000 years ago, but that it was also native to these areas up to 80,000 years ago. And it's basically a tiny blueberry-sized, bitter, acid fruit. And over time, farmers throughout Mesoamerica selected for more sweetness and bigger fruit until we get to the tomato of today. Now, as our farmer predecessors in Mesoamerica started selecting for sweeter and richer tomatoes that are better for humans to eat, they also made it better for our insect friends or enemies to eat. And so that's one of the problems we have with gardening, is we've created these very specific, very fragile plants that are delicious, and we're basically setting the table for our insect pests. We're going to introduce some of the common tomato insect pests you can be on the lookout for in your garden. There's a ton of different pests that can attack your plants in the garden, and specifically tomatoes, but we want to highlight the major ones that you probably will see during this year. The biggest one, literally, is the tobacco hornworm. It is a big, slug-like, ugly, horned beast that will devour your tomato leaves and baby fruit. They're most typically active at night, and they like to hang out on the underside of your plants during the day, but they're readily identifiable and birds love them. So if you simply pull them off and put them in an exposed area, the birds will take care of your friend for you. Stink bugs overwinter, and they prey on most garden plants. You'll see them having kind of long, shielded legs, and then the babies or nymphs kind of cluster together. They look kind of bright orange as they're young. So if you see a large concentration of bright orange insects with little black legs, they occur in several generations every year. In the South, they tend to get worse as the summer wears on. So your late season tomatoes and okra, you'll see a lot of the stink bugs on. Aphids, whiteflies, and spider mites. All of these are smaller insects you have to really get down and see. Some of them are so small at certain stages of their life that you won't see them at all, but you can tell from certain types of damage that you have an infestation. Whiteflies are really small garden pests. In fact, you might not really recognize them unless you wave your hands around the tomatoes and you see little white specks floating around. They're a big problem even though they're small, because not only do they eat the plants, and they slowly cause damage, but they excrete a kind of a sticky, sugary substance that then collects different types of molds and really fosters a lot of disease on tomato plants. So they're one of the pests you really have to look out for just by observing your plant. Aphids are also a major garden pest, and while they may not kill your tomatoes, they can spread disease and just generally increase in populations. They typically like the younger parts of the tomato plants, and also they seem to be attracted to plants that have been given higher nitrogen, so they feed on the excess. They tend to congregate around plants that have had excess fertilization. They're really soft-bodied insects, and they usually occur underneath the leaves of your tomato plants or other garden plants. They can be on peas, beans, peppers, lettuce. This is something that you have to always look out for, and once you start seeing them, you'll see them everywhere. The tomato fruitworm is potentially the most damaging of all the insect pests. They feed on a lot of different garden fruits and vegetables. They love corn. It's also called the corn earworm, and so it eats peppers, it eats okra, it eats eggplant, it eats beans, and it definitely eats tomatoes. We're going to go into detail about the garden beneficial insects that you can find on your tomato plants and around your garden. going to help you understand what to plant to attract them and what to look out for in your garden to see that they're there. Maybe the most recognizable beneficial insect is the ladybug. They're actually not bugs, they're beetles, but they love to feed on soft-skinned insects, particularly aphids, whiteflies, and spider mites. So having these guys around your garden is always good. You can actually buy them in packages and distribute them around your garden. I'd recommend only doing this once or twice because most of the time they'll just fly somewhere else and you're just spending money to put ladybugs out into the world, which isn't a horrible thing. One of the most interesting beneficial insects is the praying mantis. They are a voracious, generalized feeder. Their first meal is their brothers and sisters, so it's a cruel world out there, but they also do an amazing job keeping up and destroying garden pests. A single egg sac from a praying mantis will have about 200 baby praying mantids in there, and of those that survive, they will spread all over your garden and act as little garden watchdogs to protect your plants. The assassin bug is probably my favorite. They actually can bite humans. It doesn't feel very good, but they tend not to want to. They can't eat you, but they love eating garden pests. They'll also eat beneficial insects, so they eat anything they can get their hands on. Another interesting predatory insect is known as the lacewing. It's also called an aphid lion. The larvae of the lacewing eat up to 200 insects per week, so they're a voracious garden hunter. Another wonderful predatory insect is the whole family of parasitic wasps. They can vary in shape and size, but they all have the same thing in common, which is they target a pest, in this case the tobacco hornworm or the tomato fruitworm, and they use that as fuel or food for the next generation. So they'll either stun and bury the prey and lay the eggs next to the prey, or what will also happen is there are species of wasps that actually lay eggs into a living worm, which sounds kind of gross and creepy, and it is a little bit, but if you ever see a tomato a fruitworm or a tobacco hornworm with little things sticking out of their backs that looks like grains of rice, do not destroy the insect. Leave it on your tomato plant, let it create some more damage. It's propagating the next generation of predatory insects that are going to help you control your garden. So there are several ways to bring beneficial insects into your garden. Mostly you want to create a habitat for them. And so you can do that in a number of ways. You can have things that are always growing, perennial plants that you don't necessarily eat, and also annual plants. Any kind of woody perennial plants that can grow at the side of your garden that attract some of the beneficials that we showed is a good idea. But also many decorative garden plants also double as food sources for predatory insects. So for instance, you can grow zinnias or cosmos or sunflowers. All of those provide nectar for predatory insects before they go into the stage where they may prey on your insect pests. In our gardens, we try to grow something in the umbelliferate family as much as possible. And the umbelliferate family are things that have what look like umbrella flowers. And so the most classic example you may see growing on the roadside is Queen Anne's lace, which is also related to carrot, which is also related to parsley, which is also related to cilantro. So any of those plants, if you just let them flower in your garden, you're automatically creating a really rich source of nectar, specifically for parasitic wasps. The other thing you can do is provide a ready water source in your garden. Insects, just like other animals, require water, and so even if it's as simple as a bird bath, you will create a habitat that will bring in more insects. Some other plants that you might not even think about that are beneficial, that will help provide cover and a place to live for beneficial insects would be mint. Even the dandelion plant, when it flowers, creates a source of nectar that a lot of beneficial insects use. And marigolds are a great not only repellent of certain insects, but they'll also bring in certain beneficial insects. The other thing you want to look at is how do you treat the spaces around your garden. So if you look at this garden space that we have here, we use mulch and then grass grows in the mulch and we have to do a lot of hand weeding and hoeing to kill the grass. What we never do is spray herbicides, because there's a lot of documentation that if you spray things like Roundup, it will diminish your insect populations, particularly your earthworms. So under all this mulch, we're constantly building biology. There's a whole web of invertebrates, from protozoans to worms to the babies of the beneficial insects to the babies of the non-beneficial insects. If we spray and kill all the weeds and we spray and kill all of the pests, then we're also getting rid of all of the beneficials. And unlike the beneficials, the pests come back next year. They come back really quickly. The beneficials may take longer. So while you may be sterilizing this space, you're also making it harder for it to achieve symbiosis on its own. So you may get to a point where your garden is overwhelmed. You have pests everywhere and you're gonna spray something. And we're not gonna spray shame you. Sometimes you have to use some control. In fact, there are several organically improved insecticides that you can use. But you need to know what you're getting into, what your weapon is, and what your target is. And that's the most important thing. So broadly speaking, there are two types of pesticides. There are broad spectrum, and then there are specific insecticides. So an example of a broad spectrum insecticide would be something that you spray and it basically kills any insect that it encounters, that it comes in contact with. We want to try to avoid the use of those as much as possible. There are organic broad spectrum pesticides, but I would suggest that you use those only as a last result and only in very specific applications. For instance, there's an organic spray called Pyganic that is a pyrethrin-based spray, and it will kill any insect, including beneficials. So you want to try to spray that later in the day when our pollinator friends, our bees and whatnot, aren't out. A specific or a targeted insecticide that you may consider using on your tomatoes is called BT, and that stands for Bacillus thuringiensis. It's actually a bacteria that attacks the lining of the stomach of any caterpillar. So in order for the insecticide to work, the insect actually has to eat it. And so you're targeting something that is specifically eating your plants, and it won't affect your other pollinators. But other than that, you really want to try to focus on creating these habitats, creating this rich web. You want some pests, but you want to keep them in check. And so if you create a balance, everything won't always go perfectly, but you'll have less giant swings of huge insect pest populations. So each one of these plants that we're going to talk about during the series, we consider a teacher. So everything that you do is an opportunity to learn about what's happening in your garden, and the tomato is no different. So based on what we've talked about today, what has the tomato taught us? We can think about it a number of different ways. One of the things that it has taught me is to slow down. You can read everything you want, you can go on the internet and find all the information you want about tomato pests, but until you slow down, watch what's happening, watch the ecology that's evolving around these plants, you won't truly understand it or have an appreciation for it. So having a relationship with your tomato plants will help you better understand the diseases and the insects that affect them. The tomato also teaches us that prevention is better than the cure. So if we spray chemicals all over these tomatoes, we may have picture-perfect tomatoes, but we are going to affect the underlying biology of our garden. We want to grow food here for years and years and years and have it increase in biodiversity rather than decrease. So anything that we can do to prevent future problems, anything that we can do to enhance the biodiversity, the stronger and better food we're going to have, and the stronger and better ecosystem we're going to create. So we've done a lot of work today, and hopefully you end up with some beautiful tomatoes this year. Just remember, plant a seed, watch it grow, share the harvest, and enjoy. Take care and eat well.